I didn't complain because I felt I was there for the job. And so the relationship became more like I have a commitment with this thing.
Bob Marley wasn't just a musician. He was a legend, a prophet with a guitar, and a man whose songs carried hope, rebellion, and love all at once. But behind the reggae icon was a husband and father who had his own private battles. In his final moments, he shared a message with his wife, Rita Marley, that still echoes decades later. It wasn't flashy or poetic like his lyrics. It was real, raw, and powerful. Today, we're going to talk about Bob's last words to Rita and why they'll leave you fighting back tears. A powerful bond. When you hear Bob Marley's name, your mind probably goes straight to the music. The dreadlocks, the smoke, the anthems that could make you dance, cry, and protest all in the same afternoon. But behind the stage lights and the posters on dorm room walls was a man who had a partner by his side through it all. That partner was Alfarita Constantia Anderson, but the world knows her simply as Rita Marley. And if you think their story was just boy meets girl, happily ever after, you clearly haven't met the Marleys. Bob met Rita in Kingston, Jamaica in the early 1960s. He was still hustling to get his music career off the ground, and she was a teenage singer herself. The chemistry was undeniable, but let's not paint this like some rom-com. This was Kingston in the 60s, not Hollywood. Their relationship had grit, struggle, and a lot of faith holding it together. They married in 1966, the same year Bob briefly moved to Delaware to make ends meet. Imagine that. One day you're cutting records in a tiny Jamaican studio, the next you're in Wilmington washing hotel floors. That was Bob's hustle, and Rita was right there supporting him. From the jump, their partnership wasn't just romantic, it was musical. Rita sang with the Solettes before joining the I-Threes, the backup trio that became essential to Bob Marley and the Wailers' sound. If you've ever listened to classics like No Woman, No Cry live, you've heard her voice weaving right alongside his. Their love wasn't confined to their house. It spilled into the music that defined a generation. You could say they literally harmonized their marriage. Now, let's be real. This wasn't a fairy tale where Bob and Rita skipped through fields of ganja, hand in hand, without a care in the world. Bob had other relationships, many other relationships. If you look at a family tree of the Marleys, you'll need a magnifying glass and maybe a project manager to keep track. Rita knew about these other women, and she's been honest about the pain of it. But she's also said that her love for Bob went beyond jealousy or traditional expectations. She once explained that their connection was spiritual. It was about carrying the same mission, spreading messages of love, justice, and unity. Think about that for a second. Most people would have thrown Bob's guitar out the window after the second affair, but Rita stayed, not out of weakness, but out of a commitment to the bigger picture they were painting together. And maybe a little out of the fact that, let's face it, breaking up with Bob Marley in the 70s wasn't exactly an easy exit. Still, despite the chaos, there was always loyalty. Bob trusted Rita. He leaned on her, especially when life got heavy. She became the backbone of the family, raising their children and keeping the household together while Bob toured endlessly. She wasn't just Bob Marley's wife. She was Rita Marley, a singer, a mother, and the quiet strength behind one of the loudest voices in music history. So when you think about Bob's final words to Rita, remember this foundation. Their story wasn't smooth, but it was real. It was about love that could take the hits, stand in the spotlight, and still survive the shadows. And that bond makes his last message to her all the more powerful. Bob's health problems. By the late 1970s, Bob Marley wasn't just a superstar. He was the face of reggae across the globe. His music carried political weight in Jamaica, spiritual meaning through Rastafari, and joy to fans everywhere. But behind the smoke-filled concerts and worldwide fame, something was quietly attacking him. And unlike politicians or critics, this was a battle Bob couldn't charm, out-sing, or out-tour. It started small. In 1977, Bob injured his toe while playing soccer, a game he loved almost as much as making music. At first, it seemed harmless, the kind of scrape any athlete might brush off, but the injury wouldn't heal. Doctors soon found melanoma, a type of skin cancer, growing under the nail. Now, let's pause here. Cancer under your toenail? That's not exactly the warning sign people watch out for. But for Bob, it was a ticking time bomb, and the doctors recommended amputation, but Bob refused, partly because of his Rastafarian faith, which views the body as sacred and shouldn't be cut unless absolutely necessary. Instead, he chose less drastic treatment. To outsiders, that decision looked risky, maybe even reckless. But for Bob, it was about faith, about staying whole, and about continuing to move the way he always had. And move he did. Even as the cancer spread, Bob pushed forward with relentless energy. He recorded, toured, and performed like nothing was wrong. Picture this. He's on stage, delivering Redemption Song, pouring out lyrics that feel eternal, and all the while, he knows his own time might be limited. That takes a different kind of courage. Most of us can't even go to work with a head cold without telling everybody about it. Rita Marley later shared how difficult those years were. She watched Bob refuse to slow down, even as the illness took more of a toll. The touring was exhausting, the pain was real, but Bob wasn't the type to complain. He saw his mission as bigger than himself. For him, music wasn't just entertainment, it was a message, and he wasn't about to let cancer silence that. By 1980, things had worsened. The cancer had spread to his brain, lungs, and liver. On tour in New York, Bob collapsed while jogging in Central Park. That moment was a wake-up call, even for him. The strong, energetic man the world adored was suddenly vulnerable. Yet even then, he didn't just pack it up and hide away. He performed his last concert in Pittsburgh later that year, giving everything he had left on stage. For Rita, those months were heartbreaking. She was more than a wife at that point. She was a caretaker, a supporter, and sometimes the one who had to face the reality Bob tried to outrun. She has spoken about how hard it was to watch the disease take away his strength, little by little, but at the same time, she admired his determination to keep going. So when people talk about Bob Marley's death, they sometimes focus on the what-ifs. What if he had amputated? What if he'd stopped touring earlier? But the truth is, Bob lived life the only way he knew how, with passion, music, and faith. And throughout it all, Rita stood by him, holding the line between legend and man. The final days. By early 1981, Bob Marley's health had taken a sharp decline. The man who once sprinted across soccer fields and commanded massive stages was now frail, his body worn down by cancer that refused to back off. Yet even in those final weeks, his presence carried the same gravity it always had. People didn't just see a dying man, they still saw Bob Marley, the voice of a movement, the man whose dreadlocks and guitar spoke louder than politicians ever could. Bob spent much of his last days in Miami at Cedars of Lebanon Hospital, which today is known as University of Miami Hospital. But before that, he had tried treatment in Germany with Dr. Joseph Issels, who specialized in alternative cancer therapies. For 8 months, Bob went through holistic treatments that included diet changes and natural remedies. Some called it hopeful, others called it desperate. But for Bob, it was one last shot to keep fighting without going against his spiritual beliefs. Unfortunately, by the spring of 1981, it was clear the treatments weren't working. Bob was growing weaker by the day. He decided to return home to Jamaica, but his body didn't make it that far. During the flight, his condition worsened, forcing the plane to land in Miami so he could be rushed to the hospital. That's where his final chapter began. Inside his hospital room, the mood was a mix of sadness and reverence. Family and close friends gathered, creating a circle of love around him. Rita Marley was there, steadfast as always. She had been with him through the tours, the affairs, the fame, and the sickness. Now she was at his side as he prepared to leave this world. To those present, it wasn't just a hospital room. It was almost like a shrine, filled with quiet tears, whispered prayers, and the heavy weight of saying goodbye. Despite the weakness in his body, Bob was alert in spirit. He spoke with his children, shared moments with his bandmates, and held on to Rita's hand whenever he could. The man who had written about redemption, revolution, and love was now facing the one truth none of us can outrun. But he wasn't bitter, he wasn't angry. If anything, he was calm, like he had already made peace with the path ahead. Accounts from those who were there paint a picture of dignity in the middle of heartbreak. Bob didn't want pity, he wanted a connection. His children remember his warmth, even in those last conversations. His friends remember his faith, holding strong to his Rastafarian beliefs. And Rita, most of all, remembers the words he saved for her, the ones that would etch themselves into her soul forever. The final days of any legend often get wrapped in myth. People exaggerate, stories grow, and sometimes the truth gets blurry. But in Bob's case, the truth is powerful enough on its own. A man who gave the world music that spoke to freedom and resilience spent his last days surrounded by the same love and loyalty he had always sung about. And that's what makes his final words to Rita carry so much weight. Bob Marley's final days in Miami. Despite being a global superstar, Bob faced a reality that money, fame, and accolades could not change. His life was fragile, and time was running out. To seek the best possible treatment, Bob traveled to Germany to consult Dr. Joseph Issels, a specialist in alternative cancer therapies. There, he underwent holistic treatments that included strict diet changes, natural remedies, and a regimen designed to support the body's immune system. Even in Germany, Bob remained determined to maintain his strength and spirit. He was motivated by faith and music, and though some critics questioned the effectiveness of these treatments, he was steadfast in his belief. He knew his body was fighting a battle he could not control, but he refused to surrender his agency. Yet, as the weeks passed, the treatments were not working as hoped, and Bob made the difficult decision to return to Jamaica, wanting to spend his final days surrounded by familiar faces and the land he loved. Tragically, the journey home was interrupted. Bob became critically ill during the flight, prompting the pilot to make an emergency landing in Miami. He was rushed to Cedars of Lebanon Hospital, where doctors tried to stabilize him. It was in this hospital that Bob Marley's life hung in the balance, a stark contrast to the energetic, unstoppable presence he had always been on stage. Fans may imagine him performing with his dreadlocks flying in the wind, but in this hospital room, he was vulnerable, weak, and in pain. Despite his physical decline, Bob remained alert and aware. Family and close friends gathered at his bedside, including his devoted wife, Rita Marley. She had supported him through the highs and lows of his career, and now she held his hand in the moments when words were not enough. Rita sang hymns and offered comforting phrases, creating an atmosphere of love and spiritual strength. Bob's concern was not for himself, but for those he loved, reminding them to stay strong and continue the work of love and music even after he was gone. Those final days were emotionally intense. Visitors recall the mix of grief, reverence, and quiet awe in the room. Bob Marley, the man who had brought joy and hope to millions through his music, was now faced with the ultimate human experience, confronting his mortality. Yet even here, he maintained the grace, dignity, and calm that had defined him for decades. When he passed on May 11, 1981, at the age of 36, the world lost not just a musician, but a voice for peace, resistance, and love. The news reverberated globally, touching fans, political leaders, and fellow artists alike. But for Rita and the family, the private moments in that Miami hospital room, the hand-holding, the whispered words, the shared silences, became an indelible part of their lives. These moments set the stage for Rita to carry Bob's message forward, keeping his spirit alive beyond the charts, beyond the fame, and beyond his final breath. Bob's last words to Rita. When people talk about Bob Marley's last words, there's always a hush that comes over the conversation. It's not about the music, the concerts, or even the politics anymore. It's about a human moment between a husband and wife, stripped of all the noise. And for Rita Marley, those final words weren't just a goodbye, they were a reminder of everything their life together had meant. According to Rita, Bob's last words to her were simple, direct, and heartbreaking. Money can't buy life. That was it. No long speech, no poetic lyrics, just a blunt truth from a man who had lived enough to know it. Imagine hearing that from your partner as they fade from this world. It cuts through everything. The fame, the records sold, the posters on the wall. In the end, Bob reminded her of the one thing none of us can escape. Our time is limited. Now, if you know Bob's story, those words carry even more weight. Here was a man who had earned international fame, who had wealth compared to the poverty he came from, and yet he couldn't buy himself another day. Rita has often reflected on how Bob's last words carried not despair, but acceptance. He wasn't railing against fate. He was stating a fact, and in doing so, almost teaching one last lesson. Think about the life they shared. Rita had seen him hustle from the streets of Kingston to the biggest stages in the world. She had seen him loved by fans and criticized by enemies. She had carried the weight of their complicated marriage and raised their children while he traveled. And here he was, in the final moment, reminding her that everything else fades away except how you live and how you love. Some might wonder, why didn't he say something more romantic? Something like, "I'll love you forever," or "take care of the kids." But that's not who Bob was. His words were always bigger than himself. Even at the end, he wasn't just talking to Rita, he was talking to everyone. His last words have been quoted around the world, carved into books, and repeated by fans who find wisdom in their simplicity. For Rita, though, those words were personal. They weren't meant for a headline or a documentary, they were for her ears first. Spoken by a man she had loved and fought with, supported and sometimes been hurt by, but always stood beside. She has said those words shaped how she lived afterward, reminding her to focus on love, family, and faith over material things. If you've ever lost someone close, you know how much those final moments matter. They stick in your head, sometimes replaying at random times. Rita carried Bob's last words with her like a compass, guiding her through the decades of keeping his legacy alive. So when you hear "money can't buy life," it isn't just Bob Marley's quote. It's Bob Marley's truth, a truth he gave to Rita in his final breath, and a truth that has kept his spirit alive far beyond his years on this earth. Rita Marley's Reflections. After Bob's passing, Rita Marley stepped into a role that was as heavy as it was honorable. She became the keeper of his legacy. For some people, widowhood means slipping quietly into the background. Not for Rita. She had been beside Bob through the grind, the glory, and the grief. And she wasn't about to let his message fade away. But the memory that kept her anchored and sometimes haunted was that final line, "Money can't buy life." Rita has spoken over the years about how those words shaped her outlook. They weren't just a reminder of Bob's death. They became a philosophy she carried with her. For Rita, it meant focusing on the things you can't put a price on: family, love, health, and faith. And if you think that's just some fluffy idea, remember this. She had to raise 11 children while also protecting the Marley name from exploitation. That's not philosophy, that's survival. Interviews with Rita show a woman who's both proud and weary, proud of the music, the message, and the influence. Weary of the pressure, the constant attention, and the responsibility of carrying a legacy that belongs to millions of fans, not just her family. And yet, through it all, she kept coming back to Bob's words. They reminded her not to chase money or fame, but to value the life she had and the mission she and Bob had shared. She once said that Bob's final message was less about sadness and more about clarity. It wasn't, "I'm dying, feel sorry for me." It was, "Don't get distracted by things that don't matter." For Rita, that was both comforting and convicting. She couldn't ignore the truth of it, and she couldn't help but use it as a guidepost in her own choices. Over the years, Rita kept Bob's music alive through performances with the I-Threes, as well as through her own solo career. She became an ambassador for reggae and Rastafari, reminding audiences everywhere of the roots they had planted together. She also dedicated herself to philanthropy, especially in Ghana, where she eventually settled part-time. There, she built schools and supported orphanages, living out Bob's message of giving and community. And yet, Rita has been candid about how hard it was to balance being the widow of Bob Marley with being her own person. People expected her to always speak with his voice, but she had her own perspective too. That's where Bob's last words served as both comfort and challenge. They freed her from the illusion of material wealth, but also reminded her how fleeting life really is. It pushed her to make bold moves, even when critics didn't understand. What's striking about Rita's reflections is the mix of pain and pride. Losing Bob at just 36 years old was devastating, but instead of letting that break her, she carried his torch forward. Every time she repeated his last words, she was passing on a piece of him, to their children, to fans, and to the world. So when you picture Rita Marley today, don't just see her as Bob's widow. See her as the woman who turned his last whisper into a lifelong anthem. She didn't just hear those words, she lived them. Bob Marley's legacy of love and strength. When you step back and look at Bob Marley's life, it's easy to get caught up in the music charts, the sold-out tours, and the posters plastered across college dorms worldwide. But the real legacy Bob left behind wasn't just in vinyl grooves or cassette tapes. It was in the lessons he lived and, ultimately, the final truth he left with Rita: money can't buy life. That single sentence captures the philosophy he carried from Kingston to the global stage. Bob's legacy is rooted in love, not the soft, sappy kind that fades when life gets tough, but the strong, unshakable type that survives struggles, betrayals, and even death. His marriage to Rita wasn't perfect, but it showed how love could withstand storms. His devotion to his children proved that his role as a father mattered just as much as his role as an artist. And his connection with fans revealed how deeply he believed in humanity's ability to come together through music. Strength was the other side of his legacy. Bob didn't just sing about freedom and resilience, he lived it. Even when cancer spread through his body, he refused to stop performing until he simply couldn't anymore. He wasn't trying to be a martyr. He just believed his voice was meant to serve a purpose bigger than himself. That strength is what fans remember when they watch footage of him on stage, smiling and sweating, singing as though every line was pulled straight from his soul. His last words to Rita summed up both his love and his strength. Love, because he trusted her enough to hear his truth in that moment. Strength, because he accepted death without sugarcoating it, without hiding from it, and without letting it take away his peace. For someone who had lived his entire life pushing boundaries, that kind of acceptance was the ultimate act of courage. Today, Bob's legacy continues through his family. His children, Ziggy, Damien, Stephen, and others, have carried on the Marley name in music, activism, and culture. Each of them, in their own way, reflects pieces of Bob's strength and his message of love. And Rita remains at the center, the matriarch who remembers his last words more vividly than anyone else and makes sure his truth isn't forgotten. Fans also play a part in that legacy. Every time someone sings along to One Love or reflects on Redemption's song, they're keeping Bob's spirit alive. Those songs aren't just hits, they're reminders that life is short, money fades, and what matters is the love you give and the strength you show. So when you think about Bob Marley, don't only remember the dreadlocks, the music, or the legend. Remember the man who used his final breath to deliver a truth we all need to hear. That's his real legacy. Love that endures, strength that inspires, and a reminder that life's value can't be measured in dollars. The enduring legacy of Bob Marley. Bob Marley's influence didn't end with his passing in 1981. His music, message, and philosophy continue to resonate with millions of fans across the globe. Songs like One Love and Redemption's song aren't just tracks on an album, they're anthems that inspire hope, unity, and resilience. Bob's message was never about fame or fortune. It was about connection, love, and living with integrity. That message, strengthened by his final words to Rita, lives on today in the hearts of listeners, family, and communities worldwide. Rita Marley has been essential in keeping Bob's legacy alive. After his death, she dedicated herself to preserving his music, his message, and the cultural significance of reggae. The Bob Marley Foundation was established to provide education, support, and humanitarian aid in Jamaica and abroad. Meanwhile, the Bob Marley Museum in 9 Mile, Jamaica, serves as both a historical site and a spiritual pilgrimage. Fans come from all over the world to see the house where he was born, his guitar, and his personal belongings. It's a place that transforms visitors from casual listeners into people who truly understand the life he lived and the impact he made. BobMarley.com. The Marley family also continues his mission. Ziggy Marley, Stephen Marley, Damien Marley, and others have not only pursued music careers, but have embraced activism, promoting the same values Bob championed: peace, equality, and social justice. Their work ensures that Bob's vision wasn't just a fleeting moment in history, but a continuing movement. By performing his songs, creating new music, and supporting charitable causes, they remind the world that his spirit remains alive, not just in archives, but in action. Bob's legacy also lives in the everyday lessons his life offers. Beyond the stage, he embodied resilience, love, and spiritual strength. His final words to Rita, "Money can't buy life," continue to resonate as a reminder that material wealth pales in comparison to the love and strength we carry in our relationships, our communities, and ourselves. Fans, scholars, and casual listeners alike cite this principle as central to Bob's enduring impact. Globally, Marley's music has become a tool for cultural and political education. Students study his lyrics to understand resistance, freedom, and the human struggle. Communities use his songs to unite people across racial, economic, and geographical boundaries. From Kingston to Los Angeles, Lagos to London, the universal appeal of Bob Marley transcends generations. His music isn't just listened to, it's lived, celebrated, and reflected in social movements and humanitarian efforts. Even today, decades after his passing, Bob's legacy serves as a guide. Fans find inspiration in the life he led, the principles he embodied, and the love he shared with Rita and their family. He reminds people to prioritize relationships, to stand for justice, and to use their talents to create something meaningful. Bob Marley's influence isn't static. It grows with every new generation discovering his music and message. Ultimately, Bob Marley's legacy proves that true impact isn't measured by money or fame. It's measured by the lives touched, the values passed on, and the hope left behind. Through Rita, his family, and the millions of people who continue to sing his songs, Bob Marley's love and strength remain present, proving that even in death, a legend can still guide, inspire, and heal. Bob Marley's story is more than music, fame, or charts. It's about love, resilience, and a message that continues to inspire decades later. From his final words to Rita, to the legacy his family carries forward, Bob reminds us that life's true wealth lies in love, strength, and connection, not money. His music still moves us, his story still teaches, and his spirit still lives. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments, pass it along to someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories about legends like Bob Marley.